All right, before we start this homework, there are a few things that we will need to know. Of course, you can use your reference sheet, but just bear in mind that you do need to know all the identities on the reference sheet so that you can, you can enjoy this assignment. If not, this will be quite painful. So let me just write down a few things that you probably need for this worksheet, and then and also for this topic, and we might have to cover more as we move on. So first one, it's something easy. I would say something like tangent x. It's equal to sine x over cosine x. I think that's important. Also, cotangent x is equal to cosine x over sine x. And of course, we can also express cotangent x as 1 over tangent x. We have cosecant x being 1 over sine x. We have secant x being 1 over cosine x. And as I mentioned in class, there's one that's very, very important. We have cosine square x plus sine square x. It's equal to 1. Now, just a little thing in case you don't know, that is when we say cosine square x, okay, when we say cosine square x, it means cosine x parentheses square. Well, the same goes to the sine square x. It means parentheses sine x square. So, so make sure you know what it's being squared. We have a couple identities. For example, the odd function, even function thing. So you might see something like cosine negative x. It's equal to what? Well, it's equal to just cosine x. Okay, or sine negative x is equal to the negative of sine x. I think that's something more that you will see in a moment. So, so we will look at those later. So let's look at the first 6 questions. Well, the first 6 questions, they are here. I think this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, this is 5, this is 6, okay? So what we're trying to do is to simplify. We're trying to simplify the expression. And as I said, you have to go through the mental math process. It is not okay to start writing without knowing where things go. So I'm going to use a light gray color to illustrate my mental math process. Okay, so I hope you can also train up your mental math process. So thinking about question number 1, we're like, oh, secant x. Oh, by the way, in class, I also mentioned a tip. Okay, my tip number 1 is just everything in sine x and cosine x. Okay, everything in sine x and cosine x, that would solve, I would say, that would get you out of those difficult situations 80% of the time. But of course, to be fluid, okay, cannot just blindly apply these tips. Okay, so when you say secant x, so you can immediately think about, what's secant x right there? What's secant x? Well, I'm thinking about, what happened if it's 1 over cosine x? What happened if it's 1 over cosine x times x? What happened? And hopefully you can see that, they cancel each other right away. They divide each other, they cancel each other. So the final answer is just 1. Okay, so that's very easy for number 1. Okay, don't be surprised that you will get some simple answers like this. And then we say, well, okay, what about number 2? Number 2, well, tangent is, well, my mental math tells me the tangent is sine x over cosine x. And then what's cosecant x? Cosecant x is 1 over sine x, right? So mental math would allow you to see something like this. And you're like, what can we do here? What can we do here? And I hope that you have this instinct and say, oh, you can cancel these 2 out. So it's just 1 over cosine x It's just 1 over cosine x, which means that you can simply write down, oh, secant x as the answer. Okay, just write down secant x as the answer. Well, number 3, number 3 could be a little bit challenging, is it? Wait, hold on. Remember there was the Pythagorean identity that has something to do with cotangent and cosecant, remember? Well, I know that we have the cosine square x plus sine square x equals to 1. And with cotangent, that means I'm going to divide both sides by cosine square. No, not cosine square. It's actually, I'm going to get the divide by sine square x, so that I can also get cosecant on the other side. So that one would be cotangent square x plus 1 equals to cosecant square x. So if you can shuffle the terms onto the same side, so you can subtract cosecant x to the left and move the plus 1 to the right. So you would actually get cotangent square x minus cosecant square x is equal to -1. Okay, so make sure you can see it. So this is the kind of association you've got to be ready for. And you're like, oh, so if I can rearrange it, and you're able to think that, oh yeah, I've seen it before, the identity, then you know the answer is -1. Okay, now would it work if you think about this as in the what is it called? If you think about it as in like sine and cosine, it would probably work, but it's going to take a much longer route to do it. Now I can show it to you over here. So if you say, well, I'm thinking about this, would this work? I would tell you that it will work. It's just a little bit longer. And this is the fun of this topic, and that is you can actually have more than one way of doing things. So you have cosine square x -1. So you want to factor out the negative. So you have 1 minus cosine square x, and that is equal to negative of sine square x. So it's still related to the Pythagorean identity. So you just have to, reshuffle things a little bit so you can get what you want, and then they cancel each other out. So you still get -1 as the answer. So no big deal. Okay. And if you could relate this 1 minus cosine square x, I think we can apply it right away for question number 4, because that is exactly sine square x. And then we say, well, what is sine square x times cosecant x? Well, cosecant x is actually just 1 over sine x, right? So you can say, ooh, I can see the cancellation right there. So the sine x and the square, they kind of cancel each other out. So it just left with one single sine x at the end. Okay. And then for number 5, something that we talked about just right here. Okay, so we expect you to know, and then we say, oh yeah, so sine of negative x is the same thing as negative sine x because of odd function. And cosine of negative x is the same thing as cosine x. So sine x over cosine x is tangent x. That's the answer. Okay. Now, the last one right here, number 6 here, this is with the complementary angle. We briefly mentioned about it last semester, and I think it's worth mention right here. So sine of pi over 2 minus x is the same thing as cosine of x, okay? And cosine of pi over 2 minus x is the same thing as sine x. This is the complementary angle. So if you want the proof of it, just think about this, okay? If this is x, what do you label this? You will label this as, well, pi over 2 minus x, right? And if you try to label the signs like a, b, and c, Well, you can think about cosine of x, it's b over c, okay? Like cosine of x is b over c, and sine of pi over 2 minus x is also b over c. So that's how they relate with each other, relate to each other. And if you have cosine x over sine x, and your final answer is just cotangent of x. Done. Okay, very, very straightforward. Just have to be able to recall these identities and relate them, associate them, use them carefully, and then everything should be very easy to handle.